Hey amazing students, it's Jason Hartman back here with another lesson. We're going to talk about stress testing. Now, during the financial crisis, you probably heard that term. Maybe you heard it for the first time. Hopefully you didn't hear it in a medical scenario, because before surgery, or at least major surgeries, I hear that they do a thing called stress testing. And when we talk about stress testing as real estate investors, what we want to see is we want to see how your property will perform under pressure. You know, how much leeway do you have? How much latitude do you have if things don't go as planned? And you know what they say about the best laid plans of mice and men. They just don't always work out. And Ernest Hemingway said, "Courage is grace under pressure." Let's check this out and talk about it in the context of real estate investing. So our learning objectives for this lesson are: we're going to learn about the range of outcomes you might experience as a real estate investor. In fact, we're not going to learn about all of them because there are always other things that we cannot possibly imagine. And, you know, for better or worse, that's what keeps real estate kind of interesting, or income property, right? Learn about how to run performa scenarios to stress test your properties. So what does it look like under different circumstances? Learn about how to create a contingency plan for your investment based on stress testing. So the range of outcomes you can expect from an income property. Well, on the good side, increases in rental rates. I mean, no one's going to complain about the rent going up except the tenant. Certainly the investor will not complain about that. What about when rents go down? What if they compress? What if we get into hard times and you got to lower the rent by $100 per month? How will that affect your investment? How about appreciation? Say it does better than we expect. Well, that's great news, right? Obviously. What about high cost of repairs? What if the tenant damages the property? And, you know, on appreciation, I really should say, what about depreciation? Certainly that can happen too. Nothing goes up indefinitely, and that is the course of every investment. It goes up, it goes down. But if we buy for cash flow, if we follow my commandment number 5, remember before I told you about my 10 commandments of successful investing? Well, commandment number 5 is thou shalt not gamble. Remember, we are investors. We are not speculators. We invest for cash flow, for income. And if the prices go down, we can get through the storm because we're not investing for appreciation. So if it's flat and it doesn't happen, or on the worst case, if it goes down in value, if we can maintain our income and expense ratio, remember that's key, the income and expense ratio, we can still get a good return on our investment and we can get through any storm. Just always remember this: income property investing is largely a game of staying power. Right? You heard it here. Income property investing is largely a game of staying power. And if you can stay in the game long enough and you can handle it with grace under pressure, as we say, then you will be the winner in the long run. At least that's what history has shown us over and over again. So when we look at this, let's talk about performance scenarios. Well, vacancy rates. We want to adjust performa projections to run scenarios with higher rates of vacancy to test a market with slow uptake by tenants. You know, if the tenants just aren't taking the properties fast enough, if they're sitting on the market too long, that can definitely hurt us as investors. What about repairs? What if the tenant damages the property? What if there's an unexpected repair? It's maybe not caused by the tenant, but it's just general. As an investor, you got to prepare for this kind of stuff. What about rent? We talked about it going up and down, rent compressing, soft rental markets. But usually, let me just mention something else to you about that. In many cases, I don't want to say usually, but it probably is usually, but I don't know. I'm not going to go into that right now. But in many cases, I will say this, that rents and prices of property are non-correlating indicators, which means if the rental market softens, there's usually a reason for that. And that reason is many times because tenants are all rushing out to buy properties. This happened in the 2003, 2004, 2005 era when the real estate market was going absolutely crazy. It was frothy, it was crazy, and we know it was a bubble ultimately in many markets. And tenants were all rushing out to buy properties, so the rental market actually got softer. But when the opposite occurs, when the for sale market is slow, a lot of times then you have a situation where the rents actually increase because tenants aren't in a position to buy. Maybe they're not building much new inventory. Maybe the loans aren't very good. Maybe they're hard to qualify for. The interest rates are high. Housing affordability is low. So we will usually see rents strengthen in that market. So it's, just always remember, income property is a multi-dimensional asset class. It's a multi-dimensional asset. So there are many ways you can play the game. You could be playing the game for better rental income or better appreciation. And a lot of times those are non-correlating. So that's very good for you as an investor. Okay, so creating these contingency plans. Well, what if the vacancy increases and the rental rate drops? How do you counteract this? Well, you've got to do an analysis based on empirical data, not emotions, okay? Rent compression contingency. Well, if, again, you perform an analysis to determine how a low rental rate can drop, how low can it drop while remaining cash flow positive on the property? And one of the things I talked about before in a prior lesson is what's called the debt coverage ratio. And that's something that will really give you a good indicator on that. So what about repair contingencies? Okay, definitely establish and maintain cash reserves for the purpose of all these unplanned events like repairs and vacancy. Now, let me give you a rule of thumb for that. It is Jason Hartman's 4% rule. This is the minimum, okay? Of course, it depends how much leverage, remember the last lesson we talked about leverage, how much leverage you're using on the property, but have at least 4% in reserve that you do not use for anything else, totally dedicated to the property. 4% of the property value. So, if you've got a $1 million portfolio, how much do I want you to have in the bank, in reserve, that you're not going to use for anything but property issues? $40,000. 4% is your minimum in reserve. Now, some people might say, well, Jason, I want to have 30% in reserve. Is that okay? Well, no, actually, it's not okay. Because remember, if you have too much money in reserve, that money is not working for you. The banks basically aren't paying any interest at all. We're basically in this, near zero interest rate environment. By the time inflation and taxes come along, they're destroying your savings. So you don't want to have too much in reserves. I know that may sound odd, but remember, you are getting poorer if you keep your money in the bank, because inflation and taxes are attacking the value of that money in most economic climates. Granted, we could have deflation, and that's a different story, but we're not in that scenario, and it hasn't been a popular scenario throughout history, although, there are a few people saying that might happen a little bit, which, by the way, your income properties can perform pretty well, not ideally. Inflation is the best scenario, but in a deflationary environment, you're really looking for yield because nothing pays yield in that environment most of the times. So income properties perform fairly well even in a deflationary environment. So the key points: real estate is not always predictable, but it is multidimensional. Sometimes when rental markets weaken and rental rates drop, vacancy rates increase, and competition for tenants intensifies, okay? As an astute investor, it's important to be aware of the market and the environment for your rentals and adjust your strategy accordingly. That's the great thing about having a multi-dimensional asset, because it gives you options. Sometimes tenants cause damage to properties, of course. Everybody knows this, right? This is all the real estate horror stories that you hear, right? Is that tenants damage the properties and they require repairs. And repairs, they're not a common occurrence, but it does also depend, at least statistically, on the type of property in which you're investing. So if you invest in Class A properties, repair issues are less common. Same with Class B, but if you get in the Class C properties, the properties that aren't in very good areas, where you don't have very good tenants, they tend to cause more damage, okay? So grace under pressure, that's the motto. Let's talk about your badge and your action items here. So calculate the impact to your pro forma returns under multiple stress testing scenarios. Use the template provided, and expand on your prior analysis, okay, that you did in a prior lesson, to calculate the impact of vacancy rates at 1 month per year, 3 months, or God forbid, 6 months. That would be terrible. It's super rare, but it could happen. Got to plan for it, just in case. Rent compression. What if the rents go down by 10, 30, or even 50%? Now, I don't think I've ever heard in all these years of rents going down by 50%, but heck, plan for it anyway. Just look at the worst case scenario. It's always good to be prepared for the worst, but to expect the best. Repairs, same thing there. What if it's 10% of the rent, 25% of the rent? What if it's 50% of the rent? What if the rent on your property is $1,000 and in a certain month you have to spend $500 on repairs? Do this, upload a screenshot, and you'll get your badge, and we'll talk to you on the next lesson. Hey, congratulations. That was Module 3. Remember, of course, investors make their money when they buy, not when they sell. We learned how to evaluate the characteristics of 5 properties using Zillow or Trulia. We learned how to analyze a pro forma using documented assumptions. We learned how to evaluate 5 major markets and 5 minor markets or submarkets as to their quality for real estate investing and location using public data. We calculated the risk-return ratio on several pro forma projections based on using different amounts of leverage or financing. We calculated the impact on that pro forma return in terms of 1 month of vacancy, 3 months of vacancy, and different scenarios in terms of rents and vacancy factors. So congratulations, and let's move on to Module 4, where we will examine the different types of real estate investing that you can engage in and determine which strategy and which type is best for you. We'll see you in Module 4.